Hi everyone, it's Anne. I put together some video footage showing you the different sections of my completed elephant abstractions quilt. Just a heads up, there's no machine action in this video. I just was finding it a little bit time consuming to try to get the video camera in the right place at the right time and still focus on the custom quilting I was doing. So I apologize for that, but there is a lot of footage moving throughout the quilt, just explaining to you my thought process and why I quilted what I did in certain areas. And I just wanted to share that with you. It's a fairly long video, so if you just want to get to the end to see the close-up shots, that's fine, fast forward way through. But if you're interested in a little inspiration and some explanation of my choices, then by all means, enjoy the video. And I hope that it gives you some inspiration for your own custom quilting. Thanks for watching. So I'm just going to show you a few different areas of the quilt and talk about what I stitched where and why. And we'll be working from the feet and the legs up to the head because I happened to be at the bottom on the frame when I started filming. One of the things I wanted to point out is that normally I wouldn't do a similar design in neighboring areas like this because I like the contrast of for example, over here, these are the digital designs that you've seen before that I did with my Statler, and they're also custom placed and stitched, but they are digital. They're not freehand. The elephant body is all done with free motion quilting. So over here you can see that there's a contrast between lines and curves and spirals and then back to lines. And so I like that for texture and interest. But what I was trying to do on the elephant in this area was make the trunk pop more than the rest of the design behind. And so in order to do that, if you're new to free motion quilting, whatever you have quilted more densely will recede into the background, and whatever you have quilted more openly or left unquilted, so technically these bigger spaces are left unquilted, will pop off, and the light will pick that up. And when you're looking at the quilt, say hanging on the wall, you will notice the depth and dimension that creates. So I needed something dense on the legs if I was going to make the trunk pop. But I wanted a serpentine line kind of wavy, curvy design on here because it does give the effect of wrinkled skin. And I have quilted one of these elephant abstractions before, and I used a lot of open wavy lines. The client that I quilted it for didn't want a lot of dense quilting. She wanted more open quilting and something that did look more realistic. So I used a lot of serpentine lines and wavy, curvy designs. And I wanted to do that again here in the spaces where I was able to do that to give the effect of kind of wrinkly skin. So I knew I wanted the wider open serpentine line design, but in the background, and you can see on some of the colors, depending on what the fabric is, it's not going to be really obvious what I've stitched because I'm using blending thread. And that way it's just more texture than actual designs that you're going to follow with your eye. But this is a really good design to do to pack down your background and give a good dense filler in as an alternate to stippling, to really tight stippling. So if you like stippling, that's cool, and it certainly has its place, and I have used a micro stipple in certain areas on other quilts. But sometimes I want something different that will give the same kind of packed down effect and pop up what's around it without it being a stipple. And so this is just really dense serpentine lines, and you can see how I've got them kind of going in various directions. So in this area, it's kind of side to side moving up. And there I switch to a different direction. And I just feel like that gives a little bit more texture, a little bit more interest, but certainly you could keep them going all the way across if you wanted to do them this style. just from one side to the other. That's certainly an option. But I wanted the density and kind of the motion in the skin area because I wanted to quilt it very densely, and so that helped me do that. Got some threads still sitting around here. And the toes, I just did the inside echo so that when this is off the frame and there's nothing pulling the quilt taut anymore, it's going to suck together a little bit, and these unquilted areas are going to pop. This space here, as you can see, I'm going to explain to you right now if you haven't already noticed, I was subbing in my own fabric choices and colors with this particular pattern. And I wanted to use as many of the grunge colors as I could, the Moda Grunge fabric. And this one here ended up being on a leg. And that was not well planned on my part. It happens over here as well. So I've got part of the leg is this color and part of the leg is this color. Now, yes, it looks cool, and with the quilting, it's fine. And I wasn't about to take it out when I realized that it had happened. But what I would have preferred to have done would have been a color that was more in keeping with this color here. But this is the first time I've done a complicated foundation paper pieced pattern. And part of me was wanting to make it as simple as possible by picking one line of fabric and then just filling in with 2 or 3 extra fabrics as I went along. And so this was the closest I could get to what the original pattern called for in a totally different fabric line. But now that it's put together, and as soon as it was pieced and hanging on my wall, I was looking at it going, yeah, how am I supposed to know that's a leg? Because we've got this big diagonal line going here and over here, and it's a totally contrasting fabric. So be super careful when you're picking your own fabrics and not just using what's recommended in the pattern or what the kit you would use if you're buying a kit. Just make sure you know where those fabrics are going to end up and what effect you're going for. So like I say, it's artistic and it's fun and I'm still happy with it, but that's one of the things that I would change. Now, if I did it again. Now, what happened here, this is full disclosure, people, because I'm all about being real. This little spot here was clearly a mistake, this piece of fabric, because we've got this dark foot here, and it probably was supposed to be a color either this or very similar to it. And again, I didn't notice until it was all finished and on the design wall, and I was looking down the trunk and checking the triangles. I'm like, what is that doing there? Is that just background or what is that? And it's like, no, it's not just background, because if it was background, then that foot's shaped like that, and that is not the shape of a foot. So I had this random little white piece here, and I thought, I'm not taking it out. When I quilt it, I'll figure out what to do with it. Maybe I'll put my initials in there or give the elephant a name or something. I don't know what. But so I tossed around the idea of maybe cutting a piece of this fabric and just like hand stitching it on top and then quilting it so nobody would know. And I thought, no, I'm just going to leave it there because that is what happened. That is the way the quilt turned out. And I'll use it to stitch something which I chose the year because I thought that's significant. This was a goal that I had for this year to make this quilt. I'll just stitch the year in there and nobody's going to care. So getting back to the stitching designs, when I went into the triangles, you'll see as we go up the trunk, there's different designs in each of these lighter spaces, but I'm trying to keep that wavy serpentine wrinkled skin look line going for a good portion of the way up. And then I stop and do a little bit more detailed line stitching, and I'll explain that when I roll the quilt back for you. I did want the tusks themselves to pop off, again, off of this densely quilted background. So I had to make sure everything was dense going up, and then this was more openly quilted so that when it is looked at in its entirety, the tusks will pop. And of course, it was more challenging because this fabric is lighter than it should have been, as I just mentioned before. So had this been a darker fabric, that tusk would have popped just by its color. But because I didn't have that effect going on, I really wanted to make sure that I took care of it with the quilting. I'm just going to stop for a second and go roll the quilt, and we can talk about the rest of the elephant. So now coming further up the trunk, I was getting into some bigger spacing areas here. Actually, I quilted these first before the lower parts. It sounds like I quilted it coming upwards, but I wanted to do in the bigger areas more dense quilting and something with a little bit more interest, creating, you know, some lines, some pebbles. I've got, I don't know if you can see that work going on there in that row. And then up here, I've got another one. That kind of stitching was inspired by a video I watched that Jody Robinson did, where you kind of make your own line in an open area and then you do these kind of arcs. And it's a multi-pass design. I don't know if she intended it that way, but that's what I call it, where you kind of just go up, you follow along and do your first outline, and then you come back and do an inside echo. You just really kind of play with it and do whatever you want, and then maybe put a pebble in if it's really tall. Sometimes I put 2 or 3. But that was inspired by Jody, and I really felt like that fit in a couple of places on this quilt because it has a kind of an artistic, I want to say kind of African look to it on the elephant, but maybe that's just because elephants are kind of an African thing. That could just be my imagination. And so again, these spirals in the gray part carry right up to here, and the serpentine lines I did again on the side here because I felt like that was kind of like the leg still kind of coming around, but again, I wanted the tusk to pop. So this area is all very densely quilted as well. And here you'll see where I tried for the contrast. So I've got some very dense serpentine lines in here, and then we go into straight lines, more serpentine lines with curves and the straight lines carrying down. So I did that, of course, on both sides because at this point it's still symmetrical. It's symmetrical most of the way down until you get closer to the bottom of the legs, and then things kind of change. But you can just see the different stitching that I try to include for contrast in the different areas. And then as we roll up, we will see what happens more at the top of the head. You can kind of see the backing there. I always think the backing looks really cool when it's a solid color like this and you've got all this custom quilting on it. So, okay, just let me give it one more roll. All right, so here we are at the face area, and of course the trunk coming down from the top. I wanted to give kind of a crown effect at the top, which I might have to roll it one more time for you to see the whole area, but you can see the detailed stitching in here. Again, you've got that multi-pass design going on there, trying to carry some, you know, themes, maybe some little jewels hanging down, jewels across, and some echoes, and then bringing things together into the trunk here. Another row of that cool design, just to break it up so that you can see that there's some contrasting. And in these areas, I did do some straight line point-to-point designs just to break these up into different kinds of triangles, so it wasn't just one kind of stitching going all the way through that area. Around the eye, of course, I wanted the black to remain unquilted so it will pop when everything kind of springs back together. But I really liked the idea of this radiating line design going around the eye area. And of course, then this part being densely quilted with those close serpentine lines again, so that this will pop out more, as will these line designs. So that there's a depth effect going on here is what I was going for. And again, it's symmetrical, so you'll see both the same thing on both sides of the elephant. And just going up a little here, I'm just trying to give you a good overview of what I stitched. And most of these pieces have been ditch stitched all the way around. There again, you can see with the serpentine line, the effect that you can get with this is really cool. If you're doing it densely and kind of all different directions, it gives it a really cool texture. Okay, I'll do the last roll. I thought the last one was the last roll, but this one's going to be the last. Okay, here's the top of the elephant's head. So I started what I intended to be the kind of crowning area in this area right here, so that we've got something that kind of comes across like this and down, and then these kind of pointed areas. So I just did a figure 8 stitch in that area after I echo ditched that 1/2 inch, and I made it go from here down over, and then I just kind of ignored the piecing lines specifically and drew with my thread the area that I wanted to be a crown, and then have it flow down onto the elephant's face. I'm not entirely sure that I'm fond of this particular row here. I've been kind of looking at it and hemming and hawing, but I did carry it out into one of these other areas here so that it wouldn't look very random. It didn't turn out quite the way that I wanted it to. I'm not supposed to tell you that technically, but I'm being honest. So it does appear in more than one spot, so that's good, because if I do something really funky in an area on a big figurative quilt like this, I want to kind of draw it in, even on a quilt that has numerous blocks that are all the, that are matching going down the quilt. If you do something super funky in one area, it's nice to repeat it in another 1, 2, 3, 4 places, just to tie everything together. Or if you're doing something really cool in the border, you can bring in something that you've done in one of the blocks, ties everything together. So I think I'm going to be okay with that, because it does appear in a couple of other places. If I were doing this again, I might choose differently for that area. But again, this is how I quilt. It's very organic. It's one space at a time for the most part. Except on this elephant, you have to be careful, because you need to remember that there need to be symmetrical things happening. At least, I mean, there's no rules, right? You can do whatever you want. If you want to make both sides different, totally up to you. But my brain just wouldn't allow me to do that. So I had to make sure that whatever I was doing over here, I was keeping track so I could do it over here. So that is the elephant quilt finished on the frame. I'm going to pull it off and take some photos, and then there will be more full-sized photos when I have it hanging on the design wall and